The fall of the House of Assad presents 5 international legal implications. One of the most seismic geopolitical events in recent memory has occurred, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Reports confirm that Damascus has fallen to rebel forces and Assad has fled the country. This marks the end of decades of authoritarian rule by the Assad family, a regime infamous for its brutality before and during Syria's protracted civil war. What does this mean for international law? What happens when a regime collapses and a new leadership takes control? Here I will explore 5 key legal implications of this dramatic turn of political events. What happened in Syria must be considered in its context. To understand the legal consequences, let's first consider what has transpired. The Assad regime has ruled Syria since 1971, when Hafiz al-Assad seized power in a coup. His son, Bashar al-Assad, succeeded him in 2000. Under Bashar's leadership, Syria descended into brutal civil war in 2011. Reports indicate that Assad's forces lost control of Damascus after a dramatic rapid advance by rebel groups who received what appeared to be growing support from some regional powers as international backing for Assad waned. Now, with Damascus in rebel hands, Assad's flight signals the collapse of a regime that has defined Syria's modern history. The speed of the rebel advance is reportedly linked to both Russia and Iran's international declining support for Assad, and the weakening of his military forces raises significant legal questions at both domestic and international levels. Let me outline then the 5 legal implications of the fall of the House of Assad. Implication 1. The status of Assad's regime and accountability. The first issue involves the obligations of the fallen regime and the personal liability of its leaders. Under international law, particularly the principles of jus cogens or preemptory norms, atrocities such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity are prohibited. The Assad regime has been accused of widespread human rights violations, including the use of chemical weapons, the use of sarin nerve attacks on civilians, documented in reports by the United Nations. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, ICC, provides the framework for prosecuting such crimes. While Syria is not a party to the ICC, the United Nations Security Council could refer cases to the ICC as it has in other conflicts and wars. Alternatively, states which have invoked universal jurisdictions to prosecute such international war crimes could extend their efforts to include Assad and his top advisors. Assad's flight, therefore, does not absolve him or his officials of responsibility now he's not in power. Implication 2. The question of legitimacy of the new leadership. When a regime falls, the recognition of new leadership becomes a crucial question for third states. Recognition by other states and international organizations often hinges on 3 factors, including 1. Control. Does the new government and leadership have effective control over the territory and population? 2. Legitimacy. Was the leadership transition in accordance with international norms such as the will of the people, democratic principles? And 3. International interest. Recognition often depends on whether the new leadership aligns with the strategic goals of influential states. The United Nations, particularly the Security Council, plays a significant role in shaping global recognition. However, permanent members like the US, France, UK, Russia, or China might oppose recognition of the new leadership if the new leadership is seen as hostile to their particular interests. Similarly, nations may hesitate to recognize a new Syrian leadership or group which are proscribed or banned domestically in the particular member state. The key rebel group that has taken prominence is Tahrir al-Sham, a group reportedly banned here in the UK. Implication 3. Treaty obligations and state continuity. The fall of Assad does not dissolve Syria's statehood or its international obligations. Under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties signed by the previous regime remain binding unless formally withdrawn or rendered void by the treaty itself. So, for example, Syria's commitment on the United Nations Charter continues, including its obligations to keep the peace and security. Agreements related to the chemical weapons use, such as the Chemical Weapons Convention, remain in force. The new leadership of Syria must decide whether to honour these obligations or attempt renegotiation. But a unilateral rejection of these treaties and others could isolate Syria's new leadership, with some member states, especially if the new leadership struggles with recognition. Implication 4. Obligations towards refugees and displaced persons. The Syrian conflict and war has displaced millions of people, creating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. The new leadership inherits both a moral and legal obligation to address this crisis. Under international law, particularly the Refugee Convention of 1951, must facilitate the safe and voluntary return of refugees and internally displaced persons, IDPs. States like Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon and others have hosted the majority of Syrian refugees, which expect the new leadership to engage in repatriation talks. However, this process depends heavily on international support for the new leadership. Recognition plays a crucial role here. Without it, the new leadership may lack access to humanitarian aid or resources for reconstruction and repatriation efforts. Implication 5. The role of foreign powers. Syria's location and geopolitical significance means its future will be shaped by the actions of foreign powers. Russia and Iran, key allies of Assad's regime, have entrenched military and economic interests in Syria. They, like the US, UK and France, and other powers, may oppose any leadership that threatens their particular interests, raising concerns about violations by these third-party states of the principle of non-intervention under the United Nations Charter. All states may officially support moderate rebel factions and may push for democratic transition. However, each state may consider if so-called extremist fractions dominate the new leadership, this may be used as a reason for disengagement and even sanctioning the new leadership. Turkey, which has vested interest in northern Syria, will likely continue to assert its influence, potentially invoking its domestic anti-terrorism legislation to justify operations against Kurdish groups, such as the PKK. And further, the responsibility to protect R2P doctrine invoked during interventions in Libya may also come into play if humanitarian concerns escalate in Syria. However, its application is controversial and could face resistance in the Security Council. In conclusion, the fall of Assad marks a turning point, not just for Syria, but for the whole international legal and political order. It raises urgent questions about accountability, legitimacy, and the responsibility of states and international organizations. These developments underlies how politics and law at times clash and require resolution at times of regime change. Whether Syria emerges from recent changing order as a stable and recognized state will depend not only on the actions of its new leadership, but also on the responses of the international community. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Community Legal Education for more. And as always, feel free to comment.